Hey guys, I'm playing Sims 4 on the PlayStation 5, and once I was growing up, I pretty much grew up on a lot of the older games. That's what this video is about. And I'm going to talk about some Silent Hill games that were staple parts of my childhood. And when I say staple parts of my childhood, I mean staple parts of my childhood. And when I say that, the staple parts of my childhood was ongoingly changing every single day. Nothing exactly stayed the same when I was growing up when it comes to gaming. And Silent Hill was no different. And what had happened is when Silent Hill 1 was released, it was for the PlayStation 1 back in the day. Then it got ported to the PSP almost a good 2 decades ago, when it was in fact and in fact the whole thing had granted me the how do I say this? I wound up growing up in the era where it was the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube. I grew up in that era of gaming. How does one not, end up growing up in such an era? I grew up in that era of gaming. I didn't grow up in the Xbox Series X, Xbox One, Xbox 720, Xbox Series S. And I didn't grow up in the PS4, PS3, PS5, and Nintendo Switch era. That's the era that Gen Z grew up in. Like, I grew up in a completely different era of gaming. I didn't grow up on the Wii, which that came out like a short while. Like I didn't even I pseudo grew up in the Nintendo Wii era, but that was like a pseudo, meaning I sort of, but not really. It was kind of like a weird time for for the Nintendo Wii, and then the Nintendo Wii U came out. And what had happened was that I grew up in a particular era where gaming wasn't all that bad. Like, it wasn't as woke as it is now. And what happened is I grew up in the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Xbox, and a little bit of the Xbox 360 and Nintendo GameCube and PSP era. I grew up in that era of gaming. That and some board games and some card games and some dice games. But that was just about it. Used to play like physical, non-object, non-item based games. Like you would play like hide and seek, tag, freeze tag, Marco Polo. And like various games as such, to actually be able to do so. And there's also sports, which sports became a lost art the moment people didn't want to get hurt. Like with video games such as Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Dino, Cross, and various other horror games. It's hard to pinpoint where there was, basic things as Resident Evil and Silent Hill. That were two of the most iconic horror games. Then there was flashes in the pan like Back 4 Blood, Left 4 Dead, Dead Rising, Dead Island, Dead Space, Last of Us, and Condemned Origins. Horror-based games that were flashes in the pan that didn't get full extended sequels, like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, that were two horror juggernauts in the horror gaming zeitgeist, and the very oligarchies that try to go toe-to-toe with those two franchises that I grew up with, they fell flat. Like, they fell flat. Like, how you go and just, like, go and flatten up so much competition. Like, everybody knows once you flatten the competition, like, a lot of people start collecting up their bearings. And everybody knows. How could you not know when you're like a millennial growing up on that kind of thing? Like, you have to do diligence on said growing up and knowing about gaming and playing video games pretty much your entire life. That's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that people are just struggling with coming to grips to realize that gaming wasn't what it was as it is now, back when the video games first came out. And that's not to say that it wasn't much, but games, video games, especially video games for the PlayStation 5, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4s, Xbox One, Xbox 720, Xbox X, Xbox Series X, and also other also Nintendo game systems such as the Nintendo Switch and let's not forget the PlayStation 2 and a little bit of the PlayStation 1. Like the 3D at the time, the 3D games, 3D video games at the time were so realistic for the time periods that those video games came out in. And those games made you believe at the time that they were real or more hyper realistic. And with that being said, we all know how badly gaming wanted to be as realistic as possible back when I was growing up. But you see, the technical limitations of the hardware of the time was poorly limited. Like, you couldn't, like, play, like, let's say, WWF Attitude and WWF Warzone and WWF No Mercy. Like, you couldn't play those games and not expect them to be as realistic. Sure, they were semi-realistic with the graphics, but they were realistic graphics for the time that they came out in. And let's not forget, when it went into the SmackDown vs. Raw era of gaming, video games started getting a little more, just a little more realistic around that time. And that was around the time that 2 out of 3 of the original Silent Hill trilogy was mirroring that of like a sort of semi WWE. It was like WWE Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 adjacent type of graphics for Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3. Because Silent Hill 2 was the first Silent Hill game I played. And there was a 2-perspective story. One from Marie and James Sunderland, which was the second perspective, well, within the game's narrative and story, which the whole idea of that was there was it was the first horror, well, not the first horror deuteragonist type of game, but it was the first one of the Silent Hill series. Then it went back to protagonist in the third game. And who knows? We all know that when Silent Hill PT was supposed to be like an official, like fully realized and solidified game, that we would have Silent Hill PT coming to consoles. And after that, there was like Silent Hill The Short Message, which was a free-to-play game. And I played at least 3 chapters of the game, and I beat the game well within 1 or 2 days. 1 or 2 days! And Silent Hill The Short Message is the shortest motherfucking game out there. It's only 3 fucking chapters long. Holy shit! I ain't never seen or played a game that fucking short. I even played motherfucking Bully and I beat the game. I even beat Bully. And it was, what? A 5-chapter game? Like a 5 or 6 chapter game? And I beat that game. I even beat my very first ever. I literally beat my very first ever Grand Theft Auto game. And that Grand Theft Auto game was Grand Theft Auto 5. That was the first ever, literally the first ever Grand Theft Auto game that I've actually beaten. All the older Grand Theft Auto games are more difficult the more you think about it. But what we don't have is a Silent Hill game where it picks up where Silent Hill 4 would have picked up where Cheryl Heather Mason left off. And a quiagonist role would have been in that game if the developers of that game were to have made Silent Hill 4 and stepping over Silent Hill PT and Silent Hill The Short Message. And would have seen adult Cheryl Heather Mason. Would have seen her become a mother of 2 teenage girls that look like a couple of spitting images of her. Verbatim haircut, wardrobe, taste, face, almost everything. Like she gave birth to a couple of her own clones type of verbatim. She would have been what? At least like in her 30s and 40s, maybe 40s or 50s, maybe late 30s, late 30s, mid 40s, and would have had herself a husband, and then probably at the end of the game have a son that's like the end game protagonist, where where you play as the son of Cheryl Heather Mason and her husband, as a final unlockable playable character. And it would be like a third person perspective where like just like in The Sims, you could just jump back and forth from family member to family member in the Mason household. And having like some like Call of Duty Easter eggs and references. Like the other two Masons being from Call of Duty Black Ops that could have been like referenced as members, as Easter egg members of the Mason family, as Alec Mason being Harry Mason's brother that joined the military, and his nephew David Mason joining the military. As it would have been mentioned in a eulogy, in Harry Mason's eulogy, that would have been picture framed and hung up on Cheryl Heather Mason's living room wall. I mean, if the developers like Treyarch and Konami basically went and collabed with that Easter egg, and would have brought back time travel, or would have brought time travel into the game, and having Cheryl Heather Mason, her 3 children, and her husband going back in time to save Harry Mason from being killed, and stopping that pseudo pre-Mother Mary type of bad guy, the one that was allegedly to have swallowed the regurgitated demonic offspring of the cult known as God, and the only reason why that game was a colossal hit, that Silent Hill 3 game was a colossal hit, is because, or the whole damn series for that matter, was a colossal hit. It did not pull any punches when it comes to criticizing like the dark and gloomy and horror and psychological horror aspect of the dark and downright depressing aspects of religion. That's why all of the Silent Hill games were big, mucho massive hit in the let's trash religion and enjoy horror type of audience. The audience that it was geared towards was that kind of audience. My kind of audience. And lo and behold, it wound up being the biggest thing ever. And I grew up on like Silent Hill. And Pyramid Head, had made 2 appearances in the game. And those 2 other pseudo Pyramid Heads was, if I'm not mistaken, allegorical for the religious trauma and problems with the religious communities and the whole divine godship well within that franchise. And have, like, that being an understatement, like, the whole main bad guy of Silent Hill 3 being that cult leader woman. I don't remember her name. But she came into the gaming industry as an in-game cult leader long before Mother Miranda showed up in the Resident Evil 7 and 8 games. And with that being said, we all know Cheryl Heather Mason was the OG zombie and monster slaying and killing teenager back in 2003's not Resident Evil, but Silent Hill 3. She was the OG zombie and monster slaying teenager long before Clementine and Ellie Williams ever showed up. She was the OG teenage zombie and monster slaying, monster and zombie killing teenager. And with that being said, it was an ongoing thing. And children in video games was so extremely rare. and underrepresented, and teenagers was so poorly underrepresented back when I was a very little kid. Growing up, teenage game characters were a minorative member cast of characters, well, within any video games. Sure, you had Dead or Alive and Rumble Roses. That's because 3 out of all of the, well, 4 out of all of the main cast of Rumble Roses characters were in their late teens. But that's not the point. The point is, teenagers were so poorly underrepresented, and they were only represented in games like The Sims. And back in 05/06, Bully came out, and there was little kids in that game and teenagers. And the teenage protagonist of Bully, that was all the teen and child representation in gaming at the time. And then Telltale's The Walking Dead came out. It had teenage and child representation as well as adult representation in that game. And then The Last of Us came out, and that had teenage and adult representation in that game. And then Life is Strange came out, and it was predominantly millennial teenagers that were represented in that game. And then teenagers just stopped being represented. and Silent Hill had Cheryl Heather Mason as a baby, as a child, as a teenager. And the other blonde little girl from Silent Hill 2 was like less than memorable. But we all know Dead Rising had Catherine Ann Green, who was 7 years old in the first game, well, in the second game, and is a young adult, pseudo late teens, early young adult age in like the third game. But I've played like Silent Hill, which was a kind of creepy game, but it was still fun. I'm not gonna lie, it was still fun. though that the ambience of the music, of like the background music, was kind of depressing. And the sound effects was also kind of depressing at times too. But hey, that's Silent Hill for you. But anyways, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and share the videos.